Welcome to Culture, Worldview, and Origins. This series is on critical thinking skills in science. We're on Chapter 11, Non-Western Critical Thinking. What we're looking at is, can critical thinking be applied universally across the board, or is it a cultural tool of the Western world, and what can the non-Western world do to it, or how much can it or does it accommodate to it? Critical thinking. What do we mean when we say critical thinking? Critical thinking, as a noun, that's the name of the process, is the act or practice of thinking critically, as by applying reason and questioning assumptions in order to solve problems, evaluate information, discern biases, etc. This is a definition by Merriam-Webster, and as you can see what it is, it's the act of or practice of. It's an action, it's something, and what is it doing? It is applying reason and questioning assumptions in order to solve problems, evaluate information, and evaluate biases. So how does that fit into our house of thinking, of which we've built for different occasions, which in this series it's on critical thinking. So we've built a house on Western and non-Western, and now we're going to be looking at it again from a perspective of just non-Western, but not non-Western as in just one culture, but we're going to look at three different cultures. And what does it, where do we start, and where's the main crux of the matter? The main focus is on the epistemological beliefs. And in the house of the structure here, we have culture, and so that's zero. And so we're looking at non-Western culture. Now, a non-Western culture, what types of epistemological sources does it have? So epistemological beliefs have to do with the source of reliable knowledge and the methods of getting that knowledge out of that source. So when we're talking about epistemological beliefs, what we're talking about is, what are the beliefs of the source? Does it make a difference between what source I choose and how it affects critical thinking? And then my source, then my methods, because my methods go with my source. So the question is, do epistemological beliefs influence the ability to critically think or not? Do you have to choose a certain source and certain methods to be able to critically think? What are the four sources? Okay, we've gone over them before, but the four sources of reliable knowledge are recognized as: 1, intuitive knowledge; 2, authoritarian knowledge; 3, logical knowledge; and 4, empirical knowledge. We know that the Western side of doing things focuses on 3 and 4, which is logical knowledge or rationalism, reason, and 4, empirical knowledge, which is based on observation. In the story of Brian McGee, or the story of philosophy written by Brian McGee, he says that the early Greek philosophers, now Greece in its early days was not much different than the other non-Western countries or cultures, and something happened so that Greece kind of flipped over and made a divide between themselves and the other non-Western countries in their way of thinking. And this is what happened. It says, The Story of Philosophy by Brian McGee. He says the first philosophers, that would be the first philosophers of the Greek culture, the first philosophers were making two great breaks with the past simultaneously. In the first place, they were trying to understand the world by use of their reason, without appealing to religion or revelation or authority or tradition. Okay, so the early Greek philosophers made a sharp break off with the past. All the way up to that time, their source of reliable knowledge included tradition, authority, revelation, religion. That was the basic source of their culture and of all the surrounding cultures, which I would classify as non-Western. But now they make a break and they say, no, we are going with reason and reason alone, and we're discarding. Now, if you go with one source of reliable knowledge, what you're doing is discounting the other three sources as inferior for one reason or another. And so whatever source you pick trumps and is above and is qualified as the only source of reliable knowledge or the best source. And so what they have done is disqualified revelation or authority and tradition and have elevated reason to being the only real source of reliable knowledge, which went completely against the culture of their time. So back to the epistemological beliefs, we've looked at, okay, culture. Culture does have a way of looking at things, of forming us into a view of the world and how we view things. And so does that influence our epistemological belief of our source of reliable knowledge? And how critical is that in using critical thinking and establishing one main source? Well, now we're going to go up the scale and we're looking at methods. Okay, so if we have a source, then methods are also a part of our epistemological beliefs. So the Western philosophers, the Greek philosophers, chose the belief that their epistemological belief in their source of reliable knowledge was human reason. That's it. So that would also limit the sources or the methods. And so by choosing reason, rationalism, logic as your source of reliable knowledge, then your methods of gaining that reliable knowledge would be rationalism, which would be thinking, the process of thinking about it. It would be empiricism, which is observing the natural world and then elaborating your hypothesis or your thought about it. And then skepticism, which was a heavy dose in that came within this package deal of flipping over to reason as being the reliable source of knowledge. And so they introduced skepticism, which skepticism was a doubt. In other words, doubting the different sources, doubting the sources that were not from human reason or rationalism, and doubting intuition, doubting authority, and mainly doubting those first two sources of reliable knowledge, which is, in other words, there was introduced a package deal at the time with the Greek philosophers as they flipped over to allowing reason as the only source, and then they changed the methods. The methods then was not to go to an authority to understand knowledge or to get reliable knowledge, but their method was, okay, it was self. It was me reasoning about it. It was me observing it. It was me being skeptical of it. So the whole focus, and that's kind of what generated the Western culture, is that it is humanistically centered, where the non-Western culture is not so inward-centered, it's outward-centered. So whether it be an authority or whether it be whatever, it is outward. Whereas the turn of the West or of the Greek philosophy turned the focus inward. And so these rationalism, empiricism, and skepticism became the three methods of how to get to reliable knowledge. And that's reflected in Socrates' his method modeled his dispositions. In other words, there's dispositions or a character traits that someone has to possess to implement this type of method. So Socrates, his method modeled the following dispositions. Okay, rational thinking. Okay, that's good. Open-mindedness. Well, as some say, you can't be so open that you don't have a filter for everything falling out. So in other words, you have to hold on to something, but theirs is open-mindedness, analytical. Analytical means take it apart. So that's Western. It's dissecting, it's pulling apart, it's putting into components or putting into boxes. And so that's changing from a wholeness, holistic, it's to analytical. That's separate from holism, which the non-Western cultures practice. So it was analytical. It was self-confidence. Okay, so this is where we get the turn in, where is that now we're confident in my own abilities to rationalize and to make decisions and to discern what is true, what is not. And so it's not, now it's up to me, it's self-confidence. It generates an inquisitiveness. And so in Socrates' method, you have to have an inquisitiveness. And what's that mean? Well, you have to be curious. You have to want to investigate. But behind that, there's a motive in that you want to discover what someone else or what might be wrong in the thinking or in the processes of others. So that leads into number 6, which is questioning the status quo. Now, during Socrates' time, that was not a trait, a cultural trait, is to question the status quo, and even worse, it was not questioning of authority. And yet, this is the method that, because they switched their source of reliable knowledge from authority to reason, and that reason is based in self-confidence and rational thinking of the person, automatically you question authority. You become questioning of authority, and that's what Socrates was teaching. And that's what Socrates was teaching his young disciples, is that, okay, question the status quo, question authority, and the last one is be suspicious of any and all claims of knowledge. And so it was introducing a different mindset. It was a different spirit into the culture. And so it was suspicion. It was anybody now that was promoting knowledge or offering truth was now under suspicion of as a power play, as somebody that really had other motives, and they were not pure. They were not for my good. They were for the good of whoever is promoting that knowledge. So in other words, it has generated a whole different cultural climate that was very different from the culture, even the Greek culture before Socrates and during Socrates' time. Socrates grew up in a very conservative, authority-driven culture, and yet he somehow learned to promote something else, something different. And we had already talked about that. Where did he get that idea from? And because all ideas have to germinate and come from something. And so these were the ideas that Socrates was promoting within a culture that was very different from these ideas. A culture that was more non-Western. I don't like to put it in a negative sense, because the Western didn't exist yet. So it would have been more of an Eastern idea, but or tendency. So these are the dispositions that were required or that were generated by the Socratic method of gaining reliable knowledge. Going on, because Socrates' disposition and practices were against the cultural norms of his day, he was arrested and tried and convicted. The verdict: Socrates is guilty, firstly, of denying the gods recognized by the state and introducing new divinities, and secondly, of corrupting the young. Okay, what was he introducing? He was introducing a new divinity as being an internal voice that led him and that steered and guided him through these whole processes, a voice that was negative in saying no, 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 but he said never positive. So he would go under no and then no and okay, yes. And so it was an inner voice that guided him. And because it was an inner voice, a personal within him that was steering him, he took away the authority from the external world and took it upon himself. So therefore, the authority structure went inward, which reflects a change towards the Western ideas, forming the Western ideas versus the non-Western. And secondly, of corrupting the young. Okay, and what was he doing by corrupting the young? Well, it was the dispositions. The dispositions were all that were against the cultural norms of that day. And especially when you're talking about questioning authority, questioning status quo, having a attitude of skepticism. Those are very strong questioning attitudes that were not part of the early culture, not even Greek culture, and very much against and contrary to the non-Western culture. Today, what we call the Socratic method is a way of teaching that fosters critical thinking, in part by encouraging students to question their own unexamined beliefs, as well as the received wisdom of those around them. Okay, this is a definition taken out of a book of philosophy on critical thinking and what are its aims. Okay, in addition to critical thinking skills and dispositions, the University of Florida is suggesting that there are also critical thinking styles. Okay, the University of Florida now is looking at critical thinking, and what it appears to be doing is critical thinking is an activity on its own. And then when you have the Socratic method, then that is identifying a method of critical thinking. So what they're saying is that there's different methods to critical thinking. It doesn't have to be just the Socratic method, and maybe some groups of people are more inclined to a different method. And so this is what they have elaborated. The University of Florida Critical Thinking Inventory. So they have tested students and as to what type of method of critical thinking are they inclined to use, to implement. So critical thinking styles is the name of their inventory analysis, and they have come up with two styles of critical thinkers. They have the engager versus the seeker. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, the engager would be somebody that engages the public, engages others in their process of critical thinking. And that would be identified with the Socratic method. But then there are others that they call seekers. And the seekers are those that are privately or group seeking critical thinking, seeking knowledge, seeking information, but not in a confrontative style, but in a seeker style, not engaging with others as opposed to, but seeking with others the answers that they are looking for. So what they propose is that there's actually two styles of critical thinking. One is the Socratic, the engager, and one is, I have put the non-Socratic, which would be the seeker. So what do these two styles engage? Well, what you can see here is, and if you can barely see it, maybe you can't, there's a symbol that's above that is a hand, one hand with a puzzle in it, or a puzzle piece. And so in other words, it's personal, and it's one person that's looking at a piece of the puzzle, and this is the engager style. People who score on the engagement side of the continuum are aware of their surroundings and able to anticipate situations where good reasoning will be needed. They look for opportunities to use their reasoning skills and are confident in their ability to reason, solve problems, and make decisions. They are also confident communicators and able to explain the reasoning process used to arrive at a decision or problem solution. Okay, so the engager, one, he's a communicator, which means other focused. He is an engager with his set of thinking, with his set of skills and abilities to engage in others, to get down to the truth, reliable knowledge. So in other words, it's engaging to separate. It's engaging to see both sides and to eliminate the biases and to get to the kernel of truth or reliable knowledge. So that is the engager. The engager is active. The engager is engaging others. The other style that they have looked at is, or proposed, is the seeker style. Now, it's not a hand with a puzzle piece, but it's now together. It's two together. People who score on the seeking information side of the scale are aware of their own predispositions and biases and recognize their current opinions and positions have been influenced by his or her environment and experiences. Okay, so it's somebody that is coming into it with already a basis of understanding how their surrounding, how their experiences influence what they're perceiving and what they know as reliable knowledge. They are hungry learners, open to the opinion of others, and take care to seek out divergent points of view. Seekers have a desire to know the truth, even if the truth conflicts with presently held beliefs and opinions. Now, what that might be is self-held beliefs and opinions, or is it community-held beliefs and opinions? But whatever it is, it says that seekers have a desire to know the truth, even if the truth conflicts. And that is interesting, because in non-Western cultures, they include contradiction within their logic. In other words, yes, you can have this and you can have this also. You say, well, those two positions are contradictory. Yes, and the tension between the two in contradiction hold a balance between those two positions, and they might take a middle point. They might take, or maybe a little more to the left or to the right. In other words, in a non-Western system of logic, they do include contradiction. So in other words, there are two engagement styles, or not two engagement, there's two critical thinking styles that have been proposed by the University of Florida. And so what we're looking at is, okay, so can you still implement critical thinking, but as a seeker style or as an engager style? And now we're going to go looking at a couple different cultures and look at what kind of styles of critical thinking would be appropriate within that culture, and how do they handle it. So we're not looking at, do critical thinking skills or dispositions not exist or exist in non-Western cultures, but more of what style of critical thinking would be more appropriate for the different cultures, be it Western or non-Western. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. And again, the addresses are on the board here if you'd like to communicate with us. This is session 1. There's nine sessions in this chapter, this topic, so we've got a ways to go. But this is chapter on non-Western critical thinking, session number 1. Thank you again for joining me, and we'll see you in the next one.